Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is No Game, No Life, Episode 1, Beginner. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief reminder of what happens within this episode. So we start with an in-game battle between Kuhaku, or Blank as they're called, which are a group of players who leave their name IDs blank and play against the other characters, and they are an urban legend known for winning every single game that they play and winning it with the highest scores possible. And once the battle concludes, in the place where the 1200 players these four characters had just decimated are gathered, one of the players accuses them of cheating, and Queen, who was the last one standing, says that actually she was the one who cheated and that they had anticipated her cheating and were able to defeat her anyways without any cheats, saying that they must be really amazing. We then see that it actually is two siblings who are each playing two characters to make up the four that are Kuhaku, and they've apparently been up for 5 nights straight. They are self-proclaimed NEETs, which is not in education, employment, or training. And Shiro essentially has decided to go take a nap, and so she gives her brother, Sora, the mice that she was controlling so that he has to control all four characters at once and fight. And once they have won that battle, they get an email from someone asking them if they think that they were born in the wrong world, whether they find their world fun, if there was a world of games, what would they do? And it has a link. They follow the link to a chess game. Shiro starts because she is the more logical genius. However, Sora is the more emotionally intelligent one, and once they realize that they are actually facing a real person, not a computer, they work together as Kuhaku to defeat the other player. And then the other player basically makes an offer about, do you think you're in the wrong world? And they basically say, yeah, the world's a shitty game. We don't like it. And that is when Tet comes out of their screen and basically says he agrees that they were completely born in the wrong world and drags them into his world, Disboard, which is a world on a game board where all conflict is resolved through playing games. He informs them of his 10 commandments as they are falling through the sky, and then they land on the ground and make their way to the nearest settlement, which is the human kingdom of Alkia, which are currently undergoing a card tournament to determine the next king, as the king who had just recently passed put it in his will that he wanted the greatest gambler to become the next king. Sora and Shiro play a game to gather funds before renting a room. They then notice that one of the final competitors for the crown game is actually cheating. But then they also notice that because it is a fantasy world, that they are cheating by magic, and the commandments only forbid cheating if you're caught. If you're not caught, then it's a-okay. So they let Stephanie Dola, who is the princess or previous princess, who's not able to inherit the throne because of her grandfather's will, who is playing, let her know that the other side is cheating before returning to their room and deciding that they don't have any intention of trying to get back to the real world. They want to stay in this one. And Shiro goes to sleep while Sora opens up his phone to start making his plan. Now that we've been reminded about what happens in the episode, it's time to rank the episode. On this channel, we rank on 2 separate lists. The first list is our mostly objective ranking list, which uses set values to determine the final score and rank of the episode. Emotion is not involved in it, however, bias and judgment can still apply, which is why it is mostly objective and not entirely objective. And then the personal ranking is essentially just my personal opinion on the episode and my emotional feelings towards the episode. And that brings us to our mostly objective rank values to start off with. So the first is that we have supporting character introductions. And this, of course, is the god Tet, Stephanie Dola, and then, though she doesn't speak, the other player against Stephanie is uh, Shlami, is how it's spelt, but I'm not sure that's how it's pronounced. And they are each worth 2 points, which brings us to 6 points overall so far. We then get, of course, our main character introductions, which are Sora and Shiro, and those are worth 4 points each. And then the final positive points for this episode is +3 for the premise establishment. And as the summary indicated, the premise is two siblings who are very, very good at games are dragged into a world on a game board by the god of child's play, or just the god of play, who has made the world on the games and a world in which everything is determined by games. And they come just at the most opportune moment when the next ruler is being established in the human kingdom, and they decide to stay. And this is where we end this episode, and because of the score, we are at 17 and there were no negatives, which makes this episode a 10 out of 10. And so in our series ranking so far, we have our mostly objective ranking. It's the first episode, so there's only one, and the first episode, of course, is beginner. All right, so then we come to the personal ranking, and I have to say that I really enjoy the episode. I actually enjoy the entire series, and I particularly liked how well the series establishes the premise in such a short first episode. We get, all of the commandments, we get to know who they are, where they came from, what they're doing there, what the world is like, how the world works, all of that in like 20 minutes. Once you cut out like the beginnings, the ends, and there's obviously no commercials when you're streaming. So we get a lot of information very quickly, but all of that information I feel is necessary, so it's not in excess, and it is establishing the premise. I also like how different the reality is from Disboard, which is the game world. In reality, it's all like muted colors, a lot of dark colors. The brightest thing is the screen and the characters. And then when they get into Disboard, everything is like on neon, Technicolor, bright, in your face design with the colors, which I think really suit the series, though visually it is very, very, very colorful. But obviously, it really highlights that contrast between the world they should have been born in and the world they were born in, which was reality. In fact, when they are in the world, when they are about to get pulled in by Tet, he asks them what they think about their world, and they basically go on how there's 7 billion players making whatever moves they make. You lose if you win too much, you lose if you lose too much, if you talk too much, if you do too much, and there's no clear goals, no clear rules. They basically call it a shitty game, which is completely relatable. And then, of course, they are like, if a world of games existed, we definitely were born in the wrong one, which is what allows them to be dragged in. But even at the end of the episode, when they're they're lodging for the night in the hotel room, they're basically like having a conversation about how in a lot of like transmigration, mangas, light novels, animes, the main characters are always trying to get back to reality, back to their home, and they can't understand why anybody would want to come back to this reality when they could live a fantasy life in a fantasy world. Again, relatable. And basically, they decide amongst each other that they are not, therefore, going to try to get home, but make their life in Disboard. And that is when Sora opens up his phone to make that list of goals that they have. And then I've mentioned the 10 like commandments, covenants that the entire world works on. And of course, the first one is that murder, war, robbery, etc. completely forbidden. They can't do that. Rather, instead, the second rule is that all conflict in the world needs to be resolved through playing games. It then goes on to clarify that in the games, each of the players have to bet something that they agree is of equal value. So it doesn't have to actually be of equal value. It just has to be agreed that it is of equal value. And then it says that as long as it doesn't violate Pledge 3, anything may be bet and any game may be played, which means you could even bet abstract concepts, which we learn later on. It then notes that the challenged party gets to decide the rules of the game and what game they're playing. Any bets that are made in accordance with the pledges is basically divinely upheld, so people can't back out if they lose. They then have the fact that conflicts between groups is conducted by designated representatives with absolute authority. So this would be, of course, in the case of countries, the leader of the country will be the ones who basically act on behalf of everybody else in the country as they have authority over that group. It then notes for number 8 that being caught cheating is grounds for an instant loss, and as the characters show in this particular episode, because they do cheat in a poker game where their opponent is also cheating, that if you are not caught cheating, cheating is okay. It's only when you're caught that obviously you would lose. It then notes that in the name of God, the previous rules may never be changed, basically stamping them into permanence. And isn't it convenient that number 10, let's all have fun and play together, is not one that can't be changed, but is outside of that, which I think is very interesting. Although in the light novels, as it continues past where the show lets off, does start to make sense because a lot of the elements within the story don't necessarily see the games as fun, more so as chores or requirements. And anyways, that is where we get our first episode. So we're very clearly establishing the rules, the characters, the premise, even to a certain extent the goals, though again they just were starting to make their plan. But even with everything that we learned in the episode, we can imply or infer where their plan is heading. So, very good episode, but still a lot of information that they're kind of throwing at you all at once. And even with the covenants, like it'll take a few episodes before you actually like remember them all. I've rewatched this so many times that I do know them, but not everybody will. And it does take time to learn them, and they do kind of focus on them more as they progress. But I decided ultimately to give this episode a ranking of 8 out of 10. And of course, because it is the only episode, it is in first place so far. Now, in other series that I do, there are multiple seasons, and so we usually do rank each of the seasons against each other, which is where the number scores come into play. However, because this series unfortunately only got one season, and I wish it had gotten more because it is so good, regrettably it did not. So, the number scores really are only there for putting them into the correct order. Other than that, they don't serve a purpose in this particular series. But with that, we have now rewatched and ranked No Game No Life Episode 1 Beginner. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.